talk about the part of your journey where you notice your LDL going up, and then we'll talk about the experiment you did and the controversy, and there's a lot we can get into within that. But talk about how far into ketogenic was it before you noticed, oh, my LDL has really got an upward trend?
It was my first lipid panel. I don't remember how long after starting keto that was. It was on the order of weeks or months, because I got pretty normal testing. I would be surprised if it was more than 3 months after, although I don't remember the exact date. But yeah, my LDL cholesterol, my cholesterol total as well, along with my HDL, they all skyrocketed. My baseline on a mixed standard American diet ish was 95 milligrams per deciliter. And in my first test, I think it jumped up to like 320 or 350, I forget which. And then it started to continue to climb up to well over 500 at some points, which is jaw-droppingly high. I'll zip through a lot of the backstory, but basically me and colleagues, including Dave Feldman, who was the first person to observe that lean insulin-sensitive people who go low carb tend to have massive increases in LDL cholesterol. As part of this triad of high LDL, high HDL, and low triglycerides, the lean mass hyperresponder phenotype, what we're finding is that indeed there's an inverse association between body mass index, and probably body fat as well, and LDL rise, whereby the leaner you are, and also the more insulin sensitive, as measured by triglyceride to HDL ratio, the higher your LDL tends to go. This has now been shown in a meta-analysis of 41 randomized controlled trials. First author Soto Mota et al. In the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. But yeah, leaner people, larger jumps in LDL. That's curious. And what we're discovering, or at least the model we have that makes a lot of accurate predictions, is that this phenomenon results from a change in fuel trafficking. What we call the lipid energy model, whereby if you're lean and insulin sensitive, when you shift from carb burning to fat burning, and lean insulin sensitive people are better at doing this, then the free fatty acids released from your fat cells end up getting taken up by the liver and then shuttled back out of the liver in a storage form triglycerides that are on these very low density lipoprotein VLDL particles. And then at muscle and fat tissue, these particles get turned over. And basically the turnover process results in this very high LDL, the very high HDL, and the very low triglycerides, this triad. And so our understanding of this physiology allows us to make predictions that we can then test. One of the predictions is that you should be able to reverse the phenotype, lower the LDL by adding back carbohydrates. And we'd shown this in an interventional trial and case series before, but I didn't think there was enough discussion around it. So I chose to prove that it worked in style, which to me meant lowering my LDL cholesterol with Oreo cookies. So I did a trial where I experimented on myself using 12 Oreo cookies per day for about 2 weeks. And then I did a washout period and compared it to statin therapy, high dose statin therapy, 20 milligrams of Crestor, which is rosuvastatin, for 6 weeks. And long story short, or the punchline was, the Oreo cookies were twice as potent at lowering my cholesterol, lowering my LDL, as high-intensity statin therapy, which is a shocking finding, even in N equals 1, especially if you could predict it, and it's totally consistent with our data, our model and prior data. So that was me being intentionally provocative to get more discussion around the physiology of cholesterol changes in carbohydrate-restricted diets. The reason being is changes in cholesterol still remain like the boogeyman of low-carb diets. And I think they have so much, low-carb diets have so much clinical utility. We need to address this boogeyman and understand what's going on, including understanding the mechanisms behind the physiology and also understanding risk profiles so that we can properly and broadly implement low carbohydrate and ketogenic diets for people where they could be useful.
All right, a lot of follow-up questions to this. Starting with, you mentioned it was pretty early on that you noticed your LDL and different blood markers changing on a ketogenic diet. You're finally getting symptom relief from your ulcerative colitis, but your LDL is skyrocketing. What do you do at that time? Are you, because obviously it's this paradox where you're getting symptom relief, but you're watching your LDL go up. The way I understand it, and you can get into this too, you were very conventionally minded at that time. So you're probably, and this is new to you, so you're probably really concerned about the LDL going up. So take me back to that time where it's going up, but you're feeling better in your gut and what you do.
Yeah, I think it was disconcerting to start. I will say at the point in time, I was in the headspace. I mean, put yourself in my mind. I've now spent like a good long while being mentally depleted, physically emaciated, and I'm finally feeling great for the first time in a long time, and I have the promise of a future back. My cholesterol goes up. Kind of scary, but quite honestly, I was more in the mindset of thank God I have some life back. And now we have this cholesterol problem, presumed cholesterol problem. Let's figure that out. And honestly, my curiosity overwhelmed my concern because it was such a weird finding. Like, why the heck? I was eating like salmon, avocado, Brussels sprouts, eating basically no red meat or dairy. Why would my LDL over triple? What's going on here? And it was just so perturbing. That was my main emotion, trying to figure it out. So I don't know. I mean, I guess there was an element of fear. I've mentioned that before, so it would be dishonest to say there wasn't any. But my predominant emotion was curiosity and why this was occurring. Because I also know at the same time, like, I'm not going to have a heart attack overnight. So there's something quirky going on here metabolically. So I didn't jump towards saying I need medication for this. It's like, well, I want to understand what's going on here, and then I'll consider my options. And I've been considering my options for the last 5 years.
And you mentioned earlier the fact that this lean mass hyperresponder phenomenon happens when somebody is insulin sensitive, they're on a ketogenic diet, and then there's the three parameters where LDL goes up, HDL goes up, triglycerides come down. How common is that? Do you see people that are young, healthy like you, metabolically healthy, insulin sensitive, that don't have this happen? Or is it pretty much a given for somebody that's in your boat?
We don't know the answer to the exact penetrance. I would say the majority of people who are lean and insulin sensitive and active, who go very low carb ketogenic, will see some sort of signal going towards the lean mass hyperresponder phenotype. I think it's a pretty near universal metabolic response. I can't promise it's going to be in 100% of cases. I don't know what percent exactly, but it's to the point where I feel I could go to your average gym, pick someone who had never done low carb before, look at them, and be like, I could turn you into a lean mass hyperresponder, and be pretty confident about that. So we still need to do the study. Actually, we're designing that study right now to figure out what exactly predicts conversion, because there's going to be other things that modify the phenotype as well. But I think it's very common among lean insulin sensitive people who go low carb. It just so happens that most people aren't low carb, and or if they're low carb, aren't lean and insulin sensitive, which means at a population level, you know, it's not that common, because how many people do you know who have six packs who are keto? Small pool of people. So yeah, I would say it's probably pretty common among that population.
All right. So we know it's common in this population, common in people who are metabolically unhealthy to have a high LDL as well. Not to this extent, but it's common knowledge that that is a risk in the conventional world for cardiovascular disease, which there's a lot of different nuance to pick at here, and there's probably still a lot of unanswered questions. But in both of those camps, given your focus in this area, somebody who is in your camp, metabolically healthy, high LDL, any concern there? And then what can we take from that and bring into the metabolically unhealthy person, LDL rising? Have we missed the mark there as well?
Yeah, I would say one thing to highlight is like the levels we're seeing in lean mass hyperresponders. Comparing it to like the average quote high LDL is like saying that, you know, a gorilla, like a silverback gorilla, and a spider monkey are both primates. Like, they are two hugely different classes of just order of magnitude changes in LDL. But also, LDL is a very crude parameter. It's just a cholesterol fraction in your LDL particles. So, you get more information by looking at the LDL in the context of other markers, like the HDL and the triglycerides, which tells you a little bit more about like what's going on in terms of the underlying physiology. And also, it's worth mentioning that generally in health and medicine, the etiology, the cause, is relevant with respect to the outcome. There's data in JAMA Cardiology from 2020 showing that different drivers of high LDL, be it no known genetic cause versus monozygotic or, monogenic or not monozygotic, we're not having twins. Monogenic or polygenic familial hypercholesterolemia, they do tend to have different outcomes even for the same LDL levels. So high level cause matters. Now what we have here is a completely new metabolic phenotype and a completely new driving cause of high LDL, presumably in lean mass hyperresponders with a lot more particle flux. And all you get is this, when you get a snapshot is like, what are the levels in the blood? It doesn't actually tell you how much flux there is through the system. So it's not telling you, for example, is there decreased clearance of particles? Or, actually increased absolute clearance, but you just have so much more production and turn over these VLDLs. And that's going to be very different than someone with a broken LDL receptor or metabolic dysfunction. So with respect to lean mass hyperresponders, we don't know the risk profile, and we have every reason to believe it would not be the same absolute risk profile as a metabolically unhealthy person. Now, with respect to your other question, what can we learn from lean mass hyperresponders to apply to the general population? I would say, if we are right, and this is a metabolic phenotype that is very common among lean insulin sensitive people, what that means is there is something here to learn just about basic healthy human physiology, or let's say basic adaptive human physiology. Adaptive is probably a better word. And that could unlock knowledge that could lead to innovations for the entire human race. I think we often like to try to figure out what the actionable takeaways are in this moment for the person listening. I'd encourage people to also accept the fact that sometimes, actually a lot of time, just pursuing a curiosity, especially a metabolic one, can pay dividends even if you don't know what that's going to be. A prime example that's probably on everybody's minds right now is the invention of these new weight loss drugs. Whether you like them or you don't like them, you're pro or you're against, it's clear they're changing the obesity medicine landscape. Ozempic, Wegovy, tirzepatide, Mounjaro. Where do they come from? They initially come from in the 90s studying Gila monster venom, which is a lizard that makes venom that has a compound that acts like a GLP-1 receptor agonist. And there were some curious scientists who studied that. They would never have known that almost 30 years later, this would change obesity medicine. They were studying a lizard's venom and why it screwed up things metabolically. In that case, like, why does it have its venom? And I would say it's the same with lean mass hyperresponders. Or maybe a better analogy is the same with Brown and Goldstein, who studied homozygous familial hypercholesterolemia, which is a super rare genetic condition. They got the Nobel Prize and changed the lipidology landscape. So just because at a population level, lean mass hyperresponders are not common because most people aren't lean and low carb, doesn't mean studying their physiology as an extreme example of what might be underlying human physiology couldn't unlock truly revolutionary insights into how our bodies work.
Coming back to the Oreos, they brought your LDL down 71%. Could you have gotten the same result with sweet potatoes?
Yeah, we've done this in other patients with various carbs, starches, and fruits, especially. But the fact is, nobody was talking about those studies. So I just chose the most provocative thing I could possibly imagine. Based on our models, the source of carbohydrate with respect to LDL lowering specifically doesn't matter. That doesn't mean that it doesn't matter for your overall health. I think I'll be healthier having more sweet potatoes, fewer Oreo cookies. But with respect to the singular biomarker, if you're a lean mass hyperresponder, it's more about having carbohydrates in your diet and putting more glycogen in your liver, more carbs in your liver, to kind of turn off the flywheel of the lipid energy model, so to speak. That reduces the LDL. So sweet potatoes would work. Choose your favorite carby dish: pizza, French fries, gnocchi, pretzels. Doesn't matter. Oreos, Nutter Butters.
Part of where this becomes really critical is for people like yourself who are dealing with a health challenge or ulcerative colitis, where you're using the diet therapeutically to keep that at bay. And we could probably give a number of different examples. People with mental health challenges that are on a ketogenic diet. What I believe you did, and I want you to talk more about this, is even though you were introducing the Oreos, which was giving you around 100 grams a day of carbs, you were taking in exogenous ketones to maintain a therapeutic benefit. Can you talk about that inclusion?
So there were two reasons I included exogenous ketones. One was because typically when I have introduced carbohydrates without maintaining ketosis through exogenous supplementation, I would tend to drift into flares. I can tell because there's blood in my stool. I've done this before where I have, at least for a short period of time, some exogenous ketones at high doses, and it appears to maintain IBD, inflammatory bowel disease remission. My IBS, which is separate, does get irritated, like my stomach was not happy. But for me, ketosis, at least over short periods of time, appears to provide some, let's say, buffer room. That was one reason. The other reason I actually did it, and this was two birds with one stone, is it was methodologically cleaner. Although it sounds like I'm doing two interventions, and technically I am, adding the Oreos with the ketones, it controlled for the state of ketosis. So when I was on the statin and when I was on the carbs, the Oreos, in both cases I was in ketosis. So there isn't the argument to be made that, oh, it's because you went out of ketosis that your LDL went down. And that was something I was trying to defend against. Transparently, I was doing it specifically because of commentary that had been raised that was not substantiated by prominent lipidologists, specifically Thomas Dayspring, who had tweeted several times that ketosis lowers LDL receptor expression. And that had stirred a lot of controversy. People were taking it as truth, even though there's no data to support that. I've asked them for citations. I provided my own, including a human RCT with the ketogenic diet and a rodent model with exogenous ketosis where LDL receptor expression of the liver actually went down. There aren't data that appear that ketosis reduces LDL receptor expression. However, methodologically, in my experiment, it was cleanest to control for ketosis in order to defend against this accusation that, oh, it's because you're out of ketosis. So, this was in large part a publicity stunt to get attention on our research. So I was very aware of what criticisms might be levied, and therefore thought it was clever to include exogenous ketones to control for that variable, along with other clever Easter eggs and defenses, if I may say so, that were sprinkled into that paper. But you can look for those yourself.
So, experiment aside, you have this phenotype where when you're in ketosis, your LDL is skyrocketing. Again, with the change in triglycerides and HDL. What are you doing as a metabolically healthy person day in, day out? Or are you doing anything to help keep that LDL down? Are you having periodic sweet potatoes, any carbohydrates in any kind of protocol fashion to manage LDL?
The short answer is I'm not. The add-on to that is I would not recommend the same necessarily for other people. My approach has been I need this diet therapeutically. So carbohydrate reintroduction long-term really isn't on the table. Even, first of all, exogenous ketones aren't necessarily pleasant to take at high doses, plus they're expensive. And the long-term effects of mixing carbs and exogenous ketones is unclear. So I'm not doing continued Oreo protocol or carb cycling. I've tried a couple medications, was intolerant to both of them. And I've gotten a coronary CT angiography after having these levels for quite a few years, and I have clean arteries. So presuming that there's no jack-in-the-box phenomena where I suddenly develop a heart attack from no measurable plaque on a coronary CT angiography, which measures both calcified and non-calcified plaque, then my perspective is I have buffer room for this research area to develop to see what my risk profile is. And all things being equal, in an area of lots of unknowns, my decision has been not to sign up for pharmacotherapy for life. I could change my decision based on outcoming data, and I would not necessarily recommend for the same for other people. If you're, medicate, given your family, consider your family history, consider your personal history, consider what competing comorbidities you have, and why you're on a ketogenic diet. I think it's very reasonable for the average lean, healthy person who doesn't have metabolic complications to just have a freaking sweet potato. That's what I would do if I didn't have a history of colitis. If I had a personal family history of cardiovascular disease attributed to high cholesterol, or if I had plaque on my CT angiogram, then I would probably be aggressive with some form of therapy. The fact of the matter is, I have no measurable plaque. Despite high levels, I need this diet therapeutically, and the medications I've tried have had negative side effects for me. So I'm watching, I'm waiting, I'm measuring, and I'm reevaluating along the way.
LDL aside, any other reason you've considered having periodic insulin spikes? I know you did a video on mitophagy and the impact of insulin on that. Obviously, there's still insulin being secreted with fat and protein, so it's not like you're not secreting any. But do you think there would be, or have you considered any other benefits you could be getting from having periodic, bigger spikes in insulin?
Yeah, I think in general, biology operates well in cycles. Insulin is an anabolic hormone with positive impacts with respect to, growth, including in the brain, sufficient insulin signaling. I would say I'm probably getting enough of an insulin spike via just my normal diet. Like, I do eat a lot of protein. That's going to give me insulin spikes. It's also going to give me some, a degree of glucagon response. I'm probably getting sufficient just through the feeding and fasting cycles that I have, to probably get every bang for my buck that I'd want. There's also individual contributions of, my genetic background with respect to my ApoE status, whole different kettle of fish, whereby carbohydrate restriction might be more beneficial for me as compared to your average person with respect to my brain health. You definitely don't need carbohydrates for your brain health. All things being equal, feeding and fasting cycles, maybe with a little bit of carbohydrate, one could try to extrapolate based on some data that's been done. If you want to look up the work of Mark Mattson, he has some nice papers on glucose ketone switching in the brain. But I'm not super convinced that one would yield measurable metabolic benefits from insulin spikes from reintroducing carbohydrates beyond what we've just discussed with respect to potential improvements in lipid parameters, if you consider those changes improvements, and then things that happen with just anabolic growth signal. If you're trying to put on mass, if you're trying to bulk, carbs are probably your friends, all being equal. So, if you're a world strongman, you're trying to deadlift 1,000 pounds, please don't go keto. It will not work for you. At least I have no reason to think it would. So, but other than that, no, I wouldn't go chasing insulin spikes.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch the full episode. I'll see you over there.
Towards the end of college, I started developing GI upset with basically anything I ate. So I ended up becoming quite desperate, and after trying a bunch of medications that didn't end up really working to keep me in remission or help my symptoms, tried a bunch of different diets because I was desperate. Eventually